All right, I want to talk a little bit about character. And one of the things we're going to notice when you talk about character, it really pretty much goes along with what Brother Keith just talked about. So I can just talk about 5 minutes, and I can finish my message and just tell you to refer back to Keith's presentation, because that's pretty much what we're talking about in terms of character. Character is training. Character is developing. And character is really what we want our children to have and what we want to have as people. Servants of the Most High, believers, Americans, good citizens, etc., etc. We want to have what we call character, good character traits. Many years ago, somebody asked Abraham Lincoln what he thought about character. And he said, reputation is the shadow, but a good character is the tree. In addition, he also said, any man can go through adversity, trials, but the mark of a character in a man is how he handles power. Would we agree with that? A lot of people become corrupted. They corrupt themselves with power. I mean, we see that all the time. We've seen it throughout history. We can talk about Hitler. We can talk about Mussolini. We can talk about all kinds of leaders throughout the centuries that became powerful, and their character destroyed them because they didn't do good things. They did bad and negative things. If you look up character in a dictionary, you're going to get a couple of definitions, but they're pretty much consistent with the meaning of it. One of them says, character is the mental and moral qualities distinctive to an individual. Mental, moral qualities distinctive to an individual. Another definition says the complex of mental and ethical traits that marks a person. So it isn't so easy, is it, when you're thinking about character? But yet at the same time, the Bible says that you shall know them by their fruits, which means, in essence, you shall know them by their character. Whether they are trustworthy, whether they have integrity, whether you can rely upon them, whether they are honest, etc., etc. But our character is more than just our reputation. A reputation is what others know about us, but our character is what we do, is defined by what we do when nobody is looking at us. When nobody can see you, what are you doing? What characteristics are you displaying? Reputation, I can give you a reputation, I can have a reputation where you would think, oh, this guy's honorable. But behind the scenes, I'm doing things that are not so honorable. That's character. So character is the tree. Reputation is the shadow. But what we really want to focus on is how to develop solid character in our children that makes them successful. Character is said to be the stable and distinctive qualities built into an individual's life which determines his or her response regardless of circumstances. So it doesn't matter where they find themselves, their character carries them through. They are consistent, day in and day out. Consistency, day in and day out. You can trust them. Their word has worth. A lot of people say, well, you shake hands. In our culture, we find ways to sort of destroy the character. We have this thing where I remember growing up, you make a pledge or you shake somebody's hand and you take your other hand and you go like this. It means you don't mean it. Remember, and you guys familiar with that? Anybody ever do that themselves? You don't have to admit it. But again, what does that teach us? It means that our society, there are problems with the idea of character when we are developing a system that totally contradicts the idea of, setting up or making a pledge or going into a contract. well, yeah, I'll make it like this. I'll make it, but I'm faking it out. It's not going to happen. So again, a guy by the name of A.W. Tozer said that the excellence of gold is its purity. The excellence of art is its beauty. So the excellence of a man or woman is his or her character. It's that inward part that drives us to do the right thing, even when nobody is looking, or quite frankly, even when nobody is doing it. Because we know that there are often times when people don't do the right things. We know that. So character is that person that stands in the gap. The Bible talks about standing in the gap. It's that individual that says, I'm not going to go with the crowd. I'm going to uphold my morals, and I'm going to uphold my standards. Now, there's a lot of events that could happen that could challenge our character. There's a lot of history that we know of, and we've studied history about men that have held their character, upheld their beliefs, even to the point of death. Yeshua the Messiah being a principal figure in a man that has character, maintained his character, even though at the point he was suffering, he still maintained his credibility and his integrity. He never changed. He never said, I will change so that I can not go through the fire. He said, I'm consistent with it. And he's the figure that we're going to be primarily talking about today. Our Messiah is our primary character, individual, that teaches us the core of character and character traits. But we also have other guys that we can look at. I mean, I know that many of you know people personally, but biblically, we can talk about King David. In 1 Samuel chapter 13, verses 14, tells us that David was a man of good character. Was he perfect? No. Did he make mistakes? Yes. But overall, he had good character. He had integrity. Overall, he did the right things. And that's why he was defined as a man of good character. We also talk about, for example, King Ahab. King Ahab might have done something good, but overall his character was bad, wasn't it? I mean, he might have got something right. Hitler wasn't always mean. Hitler liked animals, and he fed his dog when his dog got hungry. So we can say, well, he was a good man. He fed his dog. He got hungry. But his overall character, right? His overall character was not good. He was an evil man. And so we talk about Hitler as doing some good things, but his overall character was bad, such as King Ahab's. And so again, character is incredibly important for us to look at. The Bible also mentions Ruth. It mentions Hanani in Nehemiah 7:2. It mentions again David, mentions Job. Those are some of the guys and women that have good character. One of the things that I want to tell you is that holiness or righteousness and character go hand in hand. You cannot have righteousness without good character. You can't have a demented mind that's going to lead you to righteousness. It doesn't work that way. So holiness, righteousness, and good character are hand in hand. They are brothers and sisters. They are blended together. They're part of the whole body. So for us, that's why it's important for us to determine our character and the things that we do, and how do we negotiate with others? How do we communicate with other people? What do they think of us? Do we keep our word? If we say we're going to do something and then we don't, what are the people saying about us? Sometimes those are some of the most difficult questions to ask, is self-introspective of, am I trustworthy? Am I somebody that people see as somebody that keeps their word? And if I'm not, what can I do? How can I change? Because as Brother Key told us, the little things, how we do with the little things, are significant of how we're going to handle the big things. If we can't handle the little things, then more than likely we're not going to handle the big things. And if we handle the big things because those bring us glory, but the little things don't, then we have a character issue. We don't want to just do the big things so people can see. We need to be faithful to the little things, even the things that people don't know, because those things are significant to our character. In 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5. And I'm paraphrasing here, but 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5 says, bring every thought into captivity to the obedience of Messiah. Every thought. How we think is related to our character. How we react is related to our character. I'm thinking about people that, anybody meet somebody that's just always angry? And they overly respond to the little things that make them angry, and then the big things, forget about it. You don't want to be in their neighborhood. I mean, it's like a nuclear bomb. You want to be way away because you're going to feel the fallout, right? And they get mad about the little things, and the big things, you're like, uh-oh, here we go. I better get in my car and drive 100 miles an hour to get away from this person. And even then, I may still feel the aftershock. Well, that's because technically that person hasn't yet mastered the idea of capturing every thought into obedience to Messiah. Instead, they're focusing on the anger and what upsets them. But you know, that little principle goes back to Brother Keith's message, because it's so important for us to begin to deal with those issues when our children are young and they're little. By the time they become teenagers or adults, it's normally too late. Too late. There are some young people that are looking to get married, and already I'm worried. Already I'm worried. Because I'm looking at the character of the person saying, man, you have a long way to go. You don't know, you don't have that principle teaching of thinking for others or thinking about others. Having an unselfish spirit. Right now, you're still in that mode. And it's going to be a hard road for you. And so, again, it's important for us to consider that we need to capture every thought and dominate it over into the mind of Messiah. Sometimes, as parents, we don't want our children to have difficulties or to go through adversities. We do everything we can to get all the adversity out of their life. You know, our children, for example, I'll just use this as an example. They go to a congregation, they go somewhere, and other children or other young people are not maybe relating to them. And we want to fix that, right? That's just an example. But I know what you guys are saying. We don't want our children to suffer. We don't want them to go through trials, so we do everything we can to get rid of the difficulty. But, you know, we're hurting them. Because one of these days, you're not going to be around to take away the trial. And when they're alone and they're going through trials, they're not going to be able to handle the difficulties. They're not going to have that character that says, I can go through adversity, I can succeed, I can maintain good character, I can maintain good morals. I'm at college, and I was brought up to be moral, and I'm going to continue in that morality. I'm going to do the things that keep me whole and righteous to my Heavenly Father. And I'm not going to be affected by the fact that everybody else is doing their thing. I'm not going to get involved in drinking, involved in alcohol, etc., etc. But that training begins when they're young. And it begins sometimes letting them go through adversity and helping them through it so that they know that this is not a perfect world. And so that they know that at times they're going to have difficulties, but they've got to figure out a way to get through it. They have to figure out a way to succeed and know the world doesn't own you or owe you anything. The world does not owe you anything. What you have and going to have, you need to go get it. You need to work for it. You need to persevere. And when somebody shuts this door, you go to the next one. And when somebody shuts that door, you go to the next one. And if somebody shuts the door and you still want to go through it, you knock persistently. And you tell them about yourself, and you show them that you're consistent, because you're constantly knocking at the door until they open it up. And then they want to know, well, what do you want? You keep bugging me. Well, I have something good to offer you. I have a high character. I have morality. And this is what I want to do. But oftentimes we take adversity away, we take the trials away from the children, and they feel growing up that that's just the way it is. I shouldn't have a difficult world. When I was a counselor, I worked with juveniles for quite many years. I worked with some of the worst juveniles in the state of Illinois. I'm talking, if I told you guys these crimes, there was a 16-year-old that had 25 murders on his case. 25 murders. He started killing people by the time he was 11. 25 murders. And when we would talk about it, he'd sit there with a smile on his face. What finally caught him, he got busted, was in Chicago. He was a Latin king, and he was shooting at a rival gang member. And he ended up killing a little 6-year-old girl. Shot her right in the head. One bullet, that's all it took. He didn't have any remorse. None at all. He already killed 25 people. What's one 6-year-old girl? It doesn't matter. And so, one of the things that I learned in terms of character, you think, well, what a bad guy. But then he would tell me about his life growing up. And the fact that how his parents trained him and raised him. Absolutely no morality. Drugs. Right? He was, I don't want to get way wacky out of it, because some of this can be gross, but he had been raped since by the time he was 3 years old. And so you can see what I'm talking about, right? The destruction of that. Now, I talked to some other kids who also had done some bad things, but you could tell that there was a difference about them, because somebody had cared, somebody had instilled something in them. They had done something wrong, but you could tell that they had a plan. They were going to get out, get into college. They made a mistake, and they were going to be successful. And to this day, there's still a kid that was in there at the age of 13, and he's like 25 now, and every now and then he'll still call me, check in, to let me know that he is doing well. He's married, he's got kids, went to college, got a job, et cetera, et cetera. But he had something that was pretty cool. He had a grandmother that really cared about him. And she continued to instill good morals, good character, even though he wasn't doing good moral, good character. But he knew about it. He was aware of it. And it got him to the point where it convinced him that a life of crime was not going to be his. And so when he got out at the age of 20, from 13 to 20, he was locked up. At the age of 20, he immediately enrolled in school and got himself straightened out, and he did very good. That's the difference between, again, good character and bad character. In Proverbs 17, verse 3, it says, "The crucible for silver and the furnace for gold, but Yahweh tests the heart." He tests the heart. We're going to have trials. We're going to have difficulties. We don't want to keep our children away from those difficulties, from the trials, because that's what builds them up. I grew up in Mexico. I was born in Texas. I grew up in Mexico. We didn't have any electricity. We had no running water. We had an outhouse. And so we didn't have it very good, but you would never know it because we were happy. We would haul water every morning, go out to the hose that was in the center of town and where everybody went, haul water on our backs and bring it in, and we had a big family, and everybody got along. We got great. And at night, we would live by candle or lantern. We would cook with fire and portable gas. So the life that you live doesn't give you good character. It's how you live the life. You may have electricity and have bad character. You may not have electricity and have good character because your parents, the people in your community are upholding good morals. And then they're upholding you as a child, and they're teaching them to you constantly, reminding you, you're doing something wrong, you're going to get disciplined, as what Brother Keith was talking about. You're going to get encouraged to behave. All of those things that you do are going to help you in the long run. In 1 Chronicles chapter 29, verse 17, it says, you test the heart and are pleased with integrity. Trials brings us and tests us to develop integrity. Integrity is simplified to mean that you keep your word. That's it. You say you're going to do something and you do it. How many of us have said we're going to do something and we don't do it? I think we all have. I mean, you don't have to necessarily raise your hand, Brian, but I'll raise it right there with you. We've all done that. We said we're going to do something and we don't, but that's integrity. Now, if that becomes our character, in other words, that's become our practice and our custom to say we're going to do something and then not do it, that's character, right? And so we've got to remember that integrity is incredibly important. People are looking at us. Also, Psalm 15, verses 1 and 2, also talks to us about character. All right, so now let's get into a little bit about talking about raising children. I have some examples that I want to talk to you about, and also then, I also want to hear from you as far as that goes in terms of your experience, what you have as far as your character, and maybe sort of your experience of things that went well because you demonstrated good character, and if you're willing, possibly some things that did not work out for you because you failed in your character. In 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 12, it says, be an example to the believers in word, in conduct, in love, in spirit, in faith, in purity. Would we agree that that's talking about our character? Right? It's talking about who we are, the wholeness of the man, or the wholeness of the woman, or even the wholeness of the child. Because the Bible sometimes talks about children that are unruly and disrespectful and non-disciplined. The Bible says that if you don't discipline your children, you hate them. But yet a lot of parents don't want to, they'll tell you, well, I'm not going to discipline my children, but I don't hate them. Well, that verse isn't really talking in terms of you hating them right now. That Hebrew word is really talking about what's going to happen as they become adults. You really are going to hate them. Because they're going to become such a burden and such a pain, such negative character, no integrity, that you are going to be very displeased with them. Very unhappy with the way they behave. Very unhappy with the way they treat others. Very unhappy with who they are as a human being. It's hard for us to consider, we have little children, we love them, we rock them, we sing to them songs, etc., etc. They grow up, we talk to them, we babble with them, we're speaking tongues, all that good stuff, right? And then they become teenagers, and then they start to, tell us they hate us. Well, wait a minute. But how can you hate me? I'm your dad, right? And then they become adults, and then you notice that they begin to mistreat other people. Not just you, but others. I mean, you see it all the time in our society. You look at a lot of senior citizens that are being mistreated by supposedly their loved ones. Why? Because somebody failed them. Somebody failed to teach them good character about respecting adults. It used to be in our culture, when we would see our uncle or we would see our grandparents, every time when we were children, when we acknowledged them, we had to go over to them, grab their hand, bow to them, and kiss their hand out of respect. My dad, who's in his 70s, still does that to his older brother, who's in his 80s. Every time that he sees my dad, our brother Robert and I, he's my brother, our dad, every time that he sees his oldest brother, he goes over to him, he takes his hand, he bows down, and he kisses his hand out of respect. You don't see that anymore. It used to be we would call somebody Mr. and Mrs., never calling them by their first name, ever. Not an adult. As a child, we would never call an adult by their first name. That was considered disrespectful. So you see how the culture has changed? Those are the things, those are the things that we're talking about that have a pivotal role in character and how we relate to each other and how we relate to one another. So as a child, for those of you that have children, you want to begin to teach your children at a young age to respect adults by calling them Mr. or Mrs., etc., etc. That's a valuable lesson to them, and that instills in them in good character of respecting other people. But if you don't do that, if you don't have that value yourself, see, you can only teach what you know. And that's just a fact. You can only teach what you know. You can't teach what you don't know. And if you're not making yourself, if you're not taking the time to better yourself, to learn the qualities, to learn good character, to learn the importance of having integrity, if you don't do that, then you cannot possibly teach that to your children. And it's going to affect them. It's sort of like a watering down of when you get like maybe orange juice or you get grape juice or you get apple juice. Has anybody ever drank watered down apple juice? Not only does it not have the same taste, not only does it not look right, but it's faded out. It's watered down. And that's what's happened to our generation. We have watered down the importance of respect. We've taken the apple juice, which would be respect. We've added water, and that would be social influences. And then what we give each other turns out to be watered down grape juice, watered down apple juice, watered down lemonade, watered down orange juice. It doesn't taste good. And it has had a negative effect in society. So again, 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 12 reminds us to be pure. So Yeshua, the Messiah, is the perfect one that we can talk about in terms of adjusting and teaching our children to walk after him and the examples that he's given us for his character. One of the aspects that we want to teach our children somehow, some way, and you know, when you're talking about character building, it isn't one thing works for everyone, right? Everybody is different, so you have to sort of apply. There are some children that are generally they're just honest. And so there are some children that are just not honest. Like no matter what, they will just lie about everything. That's just their tendency. And so those are the children you have to work with in a different way than you work with those that tend to be more honest. Right? It's easy to work with the ones that are honest, but it's not so easy to work with the ones that are mostly dishonest. But at some point, we have to take the time to teach them the value of and why being honest is important. And it begins at a very young age. When your child comes to you and tells you a lie and you don't address it, that's teaching them that, first of all, they can get away with it. Second of all, that there's no value in learning to tell the truth. And so they become, and then they get into their teenage years, and they're lying to you about everything. Everything. And then they become adults, and they lie to other adults about everything. And then they lie to their spouses, and they lie to their workers, and they're just constantly lying. Lie after lie after lie. That's an inherent, in-depth training or principle or character that they did not learn to break. Because it's a lot easier to lie than for them to tell the truth, or they hold no value in the truth. So teaching them wisdom and the importance of having that insight. In other words, seeing the future, seeing the outcome of their behavior, how is their character, how is the way that they see things, how is that going to affect them in the future? We call it play the movie forward. If I do X, Y, and Z, then what's going to happen 2 weeks after that? And then what's going to happen a month? What's the long aspect of my actions if they're negative? And if we can teach them that while they're young, while they're still children, and we're still able to communicate with them and to have those conversations with them and instill in them a positive way of thinking. In other words, go beyond what they're wanting to do. I use the example of you ask your children, listen, I want you to go in the kitchen and I want you to sweep. All right? Take the broom and sweep. And so they go and they sweep, and you come in and you find a pile of dirt or dust on the floor, and you're like, hey, I thought I told you to sweep. And well, yeah, but I couldn't find a dustpan. I don't know where the dustpan was. Now that's a wisdom teaching moment. Why? Because you can say, okay, so you couldn't find a dustpan, and let's talk about what else could you have used to pick up the dust. You could have used your hand, right? You could have used a wet napkin to clean it up. You could have used a piece of cardboard. But because you couldn't find the dustpan, you didn't go beyond the job. And those are the skills, those are the opportunities that we can say, all right, listen, not to do it with an angry way, but to say, all right, listen, you're right. I can't find the dustpan either, but what could we have done here? What's the lesson? I asked you to accomplish a task. I want the task completed. What can you do? How can you use your initiative? How can you use your mind to be creative to complete the task? Here's a piece of cardboard. We could cut this. We could use it as a dustpan. Sweep it on there. You see that? Yep, I see it. Here's something else you could use. You could then wet a napkin, and now you've cleaned that little spot where the dust was. You see that? Now it looks clean. You've gone beyond, and you've used the tools, and you've used the resources, and you've taught them to think beyond the task and to accomplish the task. Why is that important? Because when they become adults, right? When they become adults, they're going to be creative. They're going to think. And they're going to be able to solve difficult problems without having maybe the right tools. But they're still going to accomplish the mission. It's incredibly important. Teaching them to get along with each other, the siblings, gives them not only favor with the family, favor with themselves, getting along, sharing. That's an important aspect. I know a lot of families that what they do, instead of allowing their child to learn to share, they will go buy a toy for everyone so they don't have to argue, so they don't have to fight. We didn't grow up like that. When we grew up, there was one toy for everybody, and we all had to figure out a way to share because we couldn't afford 8 different toys. We just couldn't. So they'd buy one doll for the girls and one car for the boys, and then we had to figure out how to share. We had to, because we didn't each get a car. And right now, if we each would have had a car, we wouldn't have learned the value of sharing. We wouldn't have learned the value of giving each other time, or giving 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or whatever it may be. But a lot of times, parents, what they do is they want to avoid the difficulties. They want to avoid the complaints, and so they go out and they buy toys for kids so that they don't have to argue. And personally, I think that's damaging for them. First of all, because they're not always going to get what they want in life. And second of all, because they're going to expect it, and they're going to think that the world owes them everything. And the world doesn't owe them anything. It doesn't. And they're going to have a very difficult time in their life adjusting and learning principles. Another thing that you want to teach them is to uphold their convictions. Are they keeping the family norms, your practices, your customs that you've instilled in your family? Are they keeping them? Those things that keep them united. Are they keeping those? Now, I'm talking about the good stuff. I'm not talking about the negative stuff, right? I'm talking about those things that develop your character. Are they forming good habits? Do they have good principles, good habits? For example, do they get up in the morning and do they make their beds? Do they clean after themselves if they make a mess? Or do they just come in the kitchen, they make a mess, and they go about their business, they leave water all over the sink that they've sprayed all over the floor, they leave crumbs everywhere, they cut up the bread, they leave the bread, the piece that they don't want on the table, and then they go about their business because they have to get back to their game? Or do you make them come back and say, no, come back here, clean this up, you're responsible? See, all of that, we're talking about training and discipline, and all of that leads to character. Remember what I said earlier, discipline is character. It's leading to good character. And if you don't uphold them to do those kinds of things, you're hurting them. You need to demand good speech in the house. Good speech is respect towards you. How do they address you from an early child? How do they talk to you? I hear a lot of kids disrespecting their parents. And those kids that disrespect their parents disrespect other adults. And those kids that I've seen, for example, I'll see a parent tell their child to do something, and that child begins to do a tantrum or begins to act up, begins to throw a fit, scream, and so on and so on. And the parent just ignores that, avoids that. Well, pretty soon, that child is going to be a teenager. And when it counts, when the parent begins to really realize that their child is a mess, their teenager is a mess, and I don't mean any disrespect on young people here. I was a teenager 4 years ago now, so I know exactly what you guys are going through. I really do, so I sympathize. But I've grown a lot in the last 4 years. So I know the difficulties of, the people looking at you. I know that there's a lot of hormonal changes going on. You're trying to figure out who you are in the world, and you get upset, and you yell at, I remember the first time my oldest son disrespected me. I was like, what do I do with this? I never spoke to my dad that way, ever. Even as a teenager, at 19, as an adult, at 20, I never spoke to him that way. That's because he trained us to never, ever consider that. And he started training us from a very young age. He did. And I can tell you it hurt. The training hurt. But it brought us to a point of an adulthood where he didn't have to touch us anymore, and we respected him no matter what. Even if I disagreed with him, I still would not disrespect him. So when that happened, I realized, I think I messed up. My son is talking to me in a way I never would consider ever talking to my parents. So I think I must have done something wrong. But again, that's also important. You got to teach them to think for themselves. At some point, we talked a little bit about it last night, yielding control. You have to allow them to think for themselves, to make mistakes, but at the same time, to make the right corrections, to make the right decisions. And that can be very difficult at times. But that also goes along with the principles of having good character. Allow them to make mistakes, allow them to think for themselves, but be there to correct them. I sometimes tell people it's like a bowling alley, right? Or a lane, where you have the bumpers on the sides, and they're sort of the ball, and they're going to go in the gutter, but maybe they can go back, but they're not going to go beyond the border. But let them sort of either hit a strike, or let them maybe make a little mistake, but be there to encourage them and to instruct them and to build them up. So when they are old, and when they're older, they're going to do the right things because you've instilled good things in them. You've been there. You haven't micromanaged them. Micromanaged kids don't do well, by the way. Not in life. They don't do well at all. As a matter of fact, they did a test of children. You guys probably know the study, I'm sure. And they took a bunch of children and they said to them, all right, you can have one cookie right now, and there's a timer right here. If you wait 10 minutes, you can have 2 cookies. And so they kept track of those children through their life. And what they found out is the children that would wait for the second cookie 10 minutes did better in life than those that were impulsive and said, oh, we'll do it right now. But they also went beyond that because they also checked out their parenting, the parents. And what they found is those people that wanted the impulsiveness right here, right now, tended to have the impulsive or the parents who were more micromanaged. And those kids that were given the opportunity, that actually chose the 2 cookies in 10 minutes, or they got the 1 cookie, well, actually they got 2 in 10 minutes instead of just the 1, they did better in life, but they had parents who were like the bowling alley. They were encouraging. And they didn't necessarily fix the problem, they helped them through the problem. They allowed them to go through adversity and to have the difficulties, but they didn't let them fall. Does that make sense? And if they fell, they helped them through that. They didn't just shelter them. And I think sometimes that's what we want to do. We want to shelter them. The last thing I'm going to talk to you about for the last couple minutes is that your child has the responsibility to be an active and viable and supportive member of your family. That is the goal, is to make them an active, viable, and supportive member of your assembly. Not one that sucks up the resources, but ones that adds resources to the family, to the stability of the family. If you're having to spend time on your resources on that one child and it's taken away from everybody, there's a problem. Because every child is an active member, viable, adding to the quality of the family. And that's why character training is important. It goes along with discipline. You want to make them to add to the value of the family, to encourage the principles, not destroy the family, not hurt the family. And that's the goal of character training. So the last verse I have for you, and then we'll get into some question. It says here in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 21, "For to this you were called, because Messiah also suffered for us, leaving us an example, that you should follow his steps, who committed no sin, nor was guile found in his mouth, who when he was reviled did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but committed himself to him who judges righteously." Committed himself to his Father. That's what we want from our children to have, and that's why character training is an important aspect for us to have, so that they commit to the family, they commit to you, and most importantly, they commit to our Creator. Thank you, and Yahweh bless you.